Welcome to part 3 of the making of Flammable Freddy. I'm still talking about day 2 of development, where apparently I did so much that I gathered enough content to talk about for 2 whole videos. This episode focuses on the addition of graphics and audio, and with a really weird segment at the end about old men with beards. So yeah, all the stuff you see here is merely placeholder graphics. I don't think non-game making people understand how little the graphics matter when you're working on a game. Maybe because all they see is the graphics, they think that making a game is all about just drawing and then animating the stuff that you see on screen. I don't know. What I do know is that if I use placeholder graphics in the final game, I'll scare off a lot of people before they've even given the game a chance. They'll immediately judge the game on its visuals. So it's important that I improve the graphics, which is a shame because I hate drawing stuff. I think I'm a better digital artist than my games may suggest. I just have absolutely zero interest in doing it. I see the graphics as being an unfortunate necessity in game development. It takes a long time, but I don't get anything out of it personally. It isn't a case of good graphics will attract players to the game. It's more like bad graphics will put players off trying it. Which I kind of understand in a way. If the maker of a game can't be bothered to make their game look pretty, then maybe they can't be bothered to make the game fun either. So why should I, as the player, be bothered to play it? So for my games, I aim for the bare minimum graphical quality that I think I can get away with, because I think my time is better spent elsewhere. And I'll tell you how little I think it matters. If I stick to placeholder graphics for long enough, I end up forgetting to ever change it because eventually my brain registers what it looks like as being how it should look. But I did like adding little burning animations for stuff like the trees, which is often the first thing I skimp on visually. I know it's stuff like this that a few of you will notice and appreciate, even though it adds nothing of value to the gameplay itself. Next is to add the fire effects and smoke particles. You'd think that this would be essential for a game about burning stuff, but if anything, I think it detracts from the gameplay by making it harder to see what's going on. Its only purpose is to inform players that things are on fire, which a simple highlight would do equally well, and with less visual clutter. I guess it looks kind of cool to see fire spreading everywhere, so I'll give it that. But yeah, even I'm surprised by how little I care about the fire and smoke for this project. You'd think a serial pyromaniac would be all over this stuff, wouldn't you? But I spent just as much time toning down these effects as I did adding them in the first place, because gameplay takes priority over everything else. I upped the view distance by changing the base resolution from 720p to 1080p. You always want to be able to see the stuff you want to get to. I've had projects in the past where I've drawn everything way too big, so your view distance feels too short and the game becomes claustrophobic or even unplayable as a result. So I think that might have been why I made this game at just 720p in the first place, because if I design it with that in mind, and then I up it to 1080p, then I've got ample screen space to work with. Back in the day we had 5x4 and 4x3 aspect ratio monitors, but they've got increasingly wide and stretched as time has gone on. Great for first-person games, but not so much for top-down or world map experiences. As it is, I feel like the design of my virtual worlds is greatly dictated around the premise that you can see further either side of your character than you can up or down the screen. How big do the levels need to be for 20 seconds of carnage? Do I want it to be possible to pull off a flawless run where you burn everything on the screen? Or do I want for the levels to feel like they stretch out forever? I decided on a compromise between these two extremes, and preemptively added scrolling to this game, because I feel like for the levels in this game, I'll need more space. If you can help it, I believe a whole level should be visible on screen at the same time. It helps the player to plan a strategy, it keeps them informed about how previous destruction is unfolding, and it's generally more elegant than to hide most of the play area off the sides of the screen. But obviously, Flammable Freddy has scrolling, and I made the play space ludicrously large so that it gives the illusion that the water stretches out in all directions forever. I've said already how little I care for working on this game's graphics, but I've got a sweet spot for the audio. Working on Destruction Darius back in 2015 opened my ears to how great a game can sound if you invest just a little bit of effort into the sound effects for it. I took the same approach to this game, downloading Creative Commons Zero sound effects from freesound.org and layering them on top of each other to create original, unique, and hopefully satisfying sounding sound effects to accompany this game's destruction. Here are a few examples. This being a brand new concept for a game, I have very little experience of playing it. But you know who has even less? Everybody else. People are going to go into this game with zero knowledge of how to play it or even what the objectives are, so it's important that I make it as idiot-proof as I can. So a lot of this day 2 was spent making the game more accessible. Having your score visible on screen isn't good enough, so I implemented pop-up scores wherever and whenever points were gained. With hindsight, this feels like it's so obviously required. Yet when I was making it, I very nearly didn't do this. It even helps me to understand the value of destruction when I see a field of burning bushes displaying a dozen 50 scores. It helps highlight that bridges give me a lot of points, and that the oil drums, as fun and as useful as they may be, are not so important. Being continually reminded of the scoring has helped me greatly, so I can only imagine how much it helps other players who don't have the benefit of having made this game in the first place. I even had decisions to make when designing these numbers. I originally had them all colour-coded so that you could tell how big the scores were without having to read them. But which colours are best? Should the biggest numbers be in red, or blue, or something else? I decided on something better. I made them all the same colour, but varied the intensity of the colours depending on how high scoring the points were. So 50 is virtually in monochrome, 100 is pale yellow, 200 is yellow and orange, and 400 practically glows. And higher points are represented by a bigger font, which I think helps as well. It's very rewarding to get these popping up on screen. And again, I think greatly helps educate players on the scoring system, even if they have never even bothered to read the numbers. With hindsight, maybe I could have got away with adding pretty looking diagonal shadows to this game, because I decided a shadow directly below your character to represent his position in the level wasn't good enough. And so I added a red laser that would always show how high above or below ground level your person is, which would really aid people in landing difficult jumps between the islands. At a later point I went even further, visually representing the area around you that could ignite things, and even by adding health bars to every single thing you could set fire to, because from playtesting, some people seemed to think that merely touching stuff was enough to set it alight. It was painful to watch them running about on fire, failing to ignite anything else. This is the problem with inventing a new genre of game. Nobody understands how to play it, but if I simplify it too much, then it'll detract from the experience for the players who do understand it. It's yet another balance that I must strike. I also split the player's model up into individual elements, meaning that I could customise his head, feet, body, etc. Doing this even let me make my player's belly bounce a bit more than the rest of him does. And then, later on in the project, I upscaled him for the bigger main menu image. It's obvious that it's upscaled, it's imperfect, but it is very much the sort of thing that people should be coming to expect from me by now. I don't know what it is about old men with beards and bald, fat blokes. It seems like every project I work on gravitates towards those two things. I don't know if it's some subconscious desire of mine or if it's forewarning about my future self. Actually, I blame it all on Oblivion. Before Oblivion, if a game let me customise my character, then I'd always make mine look as handsome and as strong as I could. In Morrowind, if I wasn't happy with how my character looked, then I'd happily throw away hours of progress just to start it all over again. But Oblivion's character models were so butt ugly that I got more joy just from making the stupidest and silliest looking characters possible, and I've been doing so ever since. Once you don't mind controlling an unconventional looking protagonist, I think you learn that they can become more endearing to you than a standard handsome prince could ever be. Or maybe it's like how you always relate most with characters of the same age and who are going through the same experiences as yourself at that point. And maybe now I've reached that stage in life where everybody my age is starting to look old and haggard. Stay tuned for the next episode of whatever this series has become.